Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill. Hey, it's been a little while since I've talked about ways to integrate things into the MCU that either might, or in this case, we know are going to happen. I've done it a couple times before, and I enjoy it, but I don't always think that I have much to say. But this time I'm going to talk about Blade. And we know Blade is coming because they have officially announced Mahershala Ali as playing Blade, which, first off, awesome casting. I approve. Love that. And then the question becomes, well, how do we get him into the mix? Now, first thing that can be acknowledged is that, honestly, if they wanted to, they don't have to really properly integrate him into the rest of the MCU at all. They can basically leave him in isolation doing his own thing with his own vibe, which is totally viable. However, given that the MCU does try to go for a uniformity of sort of age appropriateness and a consistency of the universe, there are still a couple of hitches that need to be dealt with or at least adjusted for versus what we're used to seeing from Blade. As far as the character himself is concerned, yeah, no real alterations need to happen here. His origin, his powers, how he works, what he does, he fights vampires. Cool. The thing that they're going to have to be careful about what they do and how they do it is the vampires, the thing that he hunts. So the MCU is in an interesting place. It's certainly at this point varied enough that they do not have to justify where vampires came from. There's vampires. Cool. Add it to the pile along with everything else. But a little bit like when they eventually get around to the X-Men and introduce mutants, they do kind of have to address, why hasn't this come up before? Now, I've talked about how to handle that with mutants in, I think, even a couple of videos up to this point, like from a while back, but I have talked about that. And the vampires, while somewhat different, it's a little bit of the same thing, at least in regards to how they're usually depicted in stories that involve Blade. Because Blade doesn't usually go after just any old vampires. He goes after the head honchos. He goes after people like Dracula. He goes after the people who are running the shadowy organizations behind governments and things like that. And that is the angle that's actually going to be a bit tricky to integrate into the MCU. Because we already had something like that. It was called Hydra. Like, how many secret shadow puppeteering, running the world things are there going to... How many layers are in this onion? You know, there's only so many times you can pull that. So what we have is we have a situation where we have a character can basically be imported as is. He won't be able to swear as much as he did under Wesley Snipes, which is a shame. But other than that, he imports cleanly, and his enemy roster as a concept, as far as what they are, that imports cleanly. But it's the nature of what he's fighting against. Blade, especially in adaptations that we've seen up to this point, being the Wesley Snipes movies and the short-lived TV show, have always been about him going up against something bigger than him. Something with more members, better resources, you know, a society of vampires that has resources and establishments and pretty well integrated into society secretly. Now, on the one hand, you might think to yourself, well, if they're secret, what's the problem? So we haven't seen it up to this point because it's a secret sort of world. And yeah, that gets you some leeway. Not a ton, though. Not in terms of the, you know, they control the blood banks kind of thing, which is, again, what Blade has traditionally sort of the angle that they've gone for. Making it believable that vampires have been that integral behind the scenes and that has never come up or been hinted at, that might be a little tough to swallow. Not impossible. You could do it, but honestly, I think it's an opportunity to just go a different direction and to distinguish this take on Blade a bit more. Because I don't think the character needs a massive rework. I think, honestly, Wesley Snipes nailed it before. I don't expect Mahershala Ali to be vastly different. I'm sure he'll bring his own flavor. He's an excellent actor. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. But I do think that you can put him in a setting and a world that can feel distinctly different. And it already will because it's part of the MCU. But even as setting aside that bigger context, just the fact that importing how that worked over here doesn't map on cleanly, again, doable, that's a reason to just try something else. And there's a number of options. You could have Blade be, well, a bit more of a hunter. You could really play that up where instead of being the underdog, taking on the massive resources of vampire society, he's a hunter wiping out the stragglers. That angle would work especially well if you wanted to have an audience POV character. Sort of someone who is caught up in all this but doesn't know what's going on. Because that would give them a nicely conflicted view of Blade. Like, okay, well, these things, they seem like they're monsters, but you're just trying to wipe them out, and they just seem to be desperately trying to survive. Like, we actually okay with this? And whether or not you actually want to play with that morality or just use it to make Blade himself play up the anti-hero angle of him a little bit more, you can decide how much you want to weigh that. But that would be certainly an option. The other thing would be to just not have him focus exclusively on vampires. What you could do to honor his roots, you could have him, taking on basically any kind of creature of the night you feel like. It could be werewolves, banshees, ghosts, original demon sort of things. Basically, the monster cast of Castlevania. You could have him take him on that and have a vampire heading that up so that it's still going to come down to Blade taking on a vampire, because at the very least, the first movie or season of a show, I can't remember if they've confirmed if he's getting a show or a movie, wherever he appears, the first thing should end with him fighting a vampire, because it needs to bring out that him fighting his own nature as a half vampire. And the best way to do that is have him confronting someone who is fully that. So I think you will still need to do that, but there's no reason that he has to be mowing down nothing but vampires in order to get there. Again, to pull a comparison to Castlevania, there is a ton of gothic monstrous creatures that you can pull from to have him work his way through until he gets to the vampire. So that's another option. I think in general there's just a chance for it to get a little bit more down and dirty. Because you look at the Blade movies, and the first one had a very sort of high-tech sheen to it, almost like a techno vibe a little bit at times. And then the second one, being Guillermo del Toro, was a little bit moodier, a little bit more gothic, but I think you could get really legitimately gritty. You'll notice I skipped talking about Blade Trinity because I watched it once. I don't want to watch it again, and I prefer not to think about it. But you could really emphasize the fact that Blade is hunting in sewers. He is tracking these things down through back alleys. He is really backing them into a corner, and the corners that they're backed into are not nice places, which also makes him not a nice guy. Badass, sure, have him be the badass, but let's make Blade feel dangerous. And that's just sort of my general thoughts about ways and things to both watch out for and opportunities to play with not only Blade, but the world and the character in which he operates when they get around to getting him into the MCU. Those are my thoughts. What do you think about anything I've said, or what ideas do you have to contribute to this? Whatever they are, drop something on down in the comments. Let's talk about it. You know all the stuff to do. Like, share, subscribe. There's a Patreon, etc., etc. Don't worry about it, though. You don't have to do any of it, because at the end of the day, you are the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.